I forgot to delete one. Two places to turn it in, Betty. That was a mistake. Yep, I have two versions of it. Matthew turned it into both. Okay. I assume they're in it right now, if I were to go look. Oh, good morning. Ooh. A couple of minutes early. Okay. We're starting something new today. Got a couple of minutes, though, till class officially starts. Okay. Let's see. I need to make a little change in here. How did that happen? Let me go back and look. Which class am I in here? 208. This is this one? That's not that one. Okay. Yet I show turn in final and turn in final. Okay. My SPC students are moving a little late this morning, so it looks like anyway. Get into course content. We're in week 7. We're starting argumentation, and argumentation is going to have 2 sections to it. We're going to hear about argumentation, and then we're going to talk about the first part of the big assignment. You're going to be writing a researched essay about some kind of a topical issue. In other words, that's something that you can take a stand on, something that's going on in the world today. Some of them are political, some are not. And there's a long, huge topic list available in the argument in week 7, the argument folder. But I want to talk about, I'm going to open up the assignment so we can look at it quickly, since it's just sitting in there. I'm going to make it bigger so we can see it. Okay. You're going to select a topical issue and write an argumentative essay about that topic. I'm making it bigger and bigger and bigger, so at least you might can read it. It's in the argument folder in week 7. The essay should be a minimum of 600 words in length. That's exactly what the compare and contrast was supposed to be. Students should quote at least 2 outside sources from legitimate and reputable articles. You can't just use a website or a blog. If you're going to prove something, you have to have a creditable source. And the only way you can get an A is by using sources from the South Plains College databases. And to that end, on Thursday, one of the librarians here at Reese is going to come over and actually teach how to use the databases. So that's helpful. And the tips on how to use it would work whether you go to continue on at SPC or you go to another university. Almost, when I was working on my master's, there was no such thing as digital searching. Everything had to be done through a card catalog and by hand. It's much easier for you guys. There was a little bit of the internet by the time I finished, but it wasn't worth it. But you have to use legitimate sources. You can't just go to a website and, say, hey, this is a great one, it's got good information. You have to have reasons. You have to have legitimate sources. The essay should contain an introduction, ending in a thesis that clearly states your position on the topic. There should be at least 3 body paragraphs with topic sentences that support the thesis. The essay ends with a conclusion that either summarizes the points or comes to a greater knowledge of the topic. Please notice, though, it says no first person or second person pronouns. I'm having a tough time getting you guys to stop doing that. You can't use I, me, or my. You can't use you or your. We know when you're writing argumentation that it is the writer's, how they feel about the topic, but you don't use I or me. It's got to be a formal document is the reason. And then the last page of the document, but not part of the word count, is called a works cited. And one of the reasons we're working on this so early is that we have enough time to work on a works cited, to do things like that. But I also have a list of prohibited topics: abortion, gun control, homosexuality, and prayer in schools. And the reason for that is because many people have trouble writing about these in a logical and argumentative manner. This is not persuasive, but argumentative. And argumentation comes from logic. When individuals feel too strongly about a topic, it is difficult to argue with logic and legitimate sources. And if you have any concerns, and I have a topic list for you. If you have any concerns, you don't like those topics, you want to do something else, you're welcome to send me a course message. I'll try to get to it in a timely manner. I just finished, I actually have one essay to finish the narrative sitting right here. And it's taken me a while to get through them. But send me a message after you decide on the topic. And I can already tell you that some of the stuff that's coming up due this week is probably going to get pushed back. I'm just a little concerned about, I don't think we're paying good enough attention sometimes, okay? And to top everything else off, none of my schools had school yesterday, and only one school bothered to let me know, and that was as I sent essays to them, my facilitator said, hey, we don't have school today. I was like, why didn't somebody tell me that? I had no knowledge that you guys weren't having school. So, it made it tough. Let's see. Oh, Miss Caprock nominations, that's just what we need. So that's argumentation, that's the essay. So, you should have a document that says argumentation, not the art of persuasion. And if you stop and think about it, remember I introed comparing contrast, basically saying, when you're sitting around with your friends and you want to decide what you're going to do, you start comparing and contrasting your options. Then once you start talking about them, all of a sudden people start having a favorite, so you start trying to persuade everybody to do what you want to do. So we're showing that compare and contrast can be used in an argumentative essay. In fact, one of the best research essays I got was on the topic of which brand is the best mascara. And she looked at 3 different brands, compared and contrasted all of them, had research on them, and it, solved the problem. This is the one I couldn't afford, but that's all right. Good morning, Kayla. Yeah, everybody's running late. We do have class. Okay. I'm in here, I'm teaching, okay? So we're looking at the art of argumentation, not the art of persuasion, that document, okay? Make this bigger so that we can both see it. Basically, argumentation is the process of reasoning that asserts the soundness of a debatable position, belief, or a conclusion that someone has reached. Argument takes a stand supported by evidence. Persuasion doesn't always use evidence, okay? It urges people to share the writer's perspective and insights, and persuasion is a general term that refers to how a writer influences an audience to adopt a belief or set of values, okay? To persuade an audience, a writer relies on various kinds of appeals. They are pathos, logos, and ethos. Those are Aristotelian appeals. That's Aristotle, that dead Greek a long time ago. I had to read him when I was getting my master's in English. And let me tell you, it was hard. You know, I harp on you guys about indenting your paragraphs. There are no paragraphs. It's all, the books are entirely one long paragraph, so. But that's, you know, you just have to deal with that, okay? But pathos is based on emotion. It's the appeal to the emotions. Logos is based on logic, and ethos is based on the character reputation of the writer. And so, just to give you a heads up, you know, we had that presidential election last fall. A lot of the political ads are based on pathos. They're trying to appeal to the readers, the viewers of those commercials. And, you know, and so what they do is, very interestingly, most of the time, when you're looking at an ad, it's like one party saying that the candidate for the other party is a bad person. They'll say, they lied to you about this, they did that, and that is a logical fallacy. If you try to, it would be as if, you know, let's say you're running for president, and I get up and I'm the opposing candidate, and I said, guess what? He lies all the time. He never tells the truth. It's called poisoning the well. So if I accuse you of being a liar and enough people read that on Facebook or see it on TV, they're going to believe it. And it's poisoning the well, and it's a logical fallacy, which is an appeal to the emotions, or actually it's an ethical, it's ethos too, because I'm questioning your character. Okay. All right. I'll just hang on. Maybe everybody will show up in a minute. Okay. So that's what's going on. We're on argumentation, not the art of persuasion of the documents you have, okay? Argumentation is basically appeal to logos, which is reason. And that's what you have to write. You have to write from logic on this particular assignment. In an argument, a writer connects a series of statements so that they lead logically to a conclusion. It differs from persuasion in that you're not necessarily asking for a call to action. You're just trying to show, whoa, what happened just then? Show that certain ideas are valid and others are not. All right? There's a formal structure to argumentation of making points, supplying evidence, establishing a logical chain of reasoning, refuting opposing arguments, and accommodating the audience's views. So we will be doing that. We're going to have an introduction. We're going to have body paragraphs, and the next to the last paragraph will be called refuting the counter-argument. You actually have to mention the opposing side. So I don't know if any of you have been taught that. In the past, I haven't had time to teach it because I try to teach this paper in 2 weeks. And I thought, we're going to do this over 6 weeks, okay? Yeah, it sounds like a long time, but there's another assignment right in smack dab at the beginning of it. So most effective arguments combine 2 or more of those appeals, even though their primary appeal is to logos or reason. You can still use another one. You can use emotion. If I wanted to, say I wanted to get you to agree with me that the death penalty should be abolished because of whatever my reasons are, and one of them is I talk about how incredibly painful it is for an inmate to be injected with those drugs, and it doesn't kill them, and they writhe in agony for hours. I could do that. That's appealing to your emotions to say that that's bad. But then again, I could also say the death penalty needs to remain in effect because it gets rid of horrible people who've committed horrible crimes against humanity. And so I could tell a story about a guy who kills lots of little children, and that's appealing to your emotions also, isn't it? So I can do it either way. I can argue both sides. Remember, that's one of the traits of a woman. We can look at both sides of an argument, okay? Remember that although appeals to the audience emotions may reinforce the main point you're doing, they don't replace sound logic. So choosing a topic. You should have an emotional or intellectual stake in your topic, but you should also be open-minded and willing to consider all sides of the point. If evidence goes against your position, and I'm going to be perfectly honest, the death penalty being abolished or the death penalty staying in effect is still a topic. It's been a topic forever. But if you go out there and look for evidence about why we should keep it, it doesn't do any of the things it says it's supposed to do. It's not a deterrent. It's not administered equitably. In other words, you tend to give the death penalty more to minorities and men. And it's also given to the mentally challenged, you know. So there are a lot of reasons why we should not have the death penalty. So if you want to write that topic, it's a harder one to do because I'm going to tell you that that's just the way it rolls. But if you get stuck and you can't think of a topic to write on, that's always a good one. There's lots of information out there. You must be able to consider your topic from other viewpoints. If you cannot do so, choose something and be objective about it. So developing a thesis, it has to be debatable. One of the topics on the topics list is that smoking should be banned. Is there anybody out there that wants to say smoking is good for people? I mean, there's just, I don't think, even if you're just smoking marijuana, I mean, it's still hurting your lungs, right? I don't care if it makes you feel better. It's hurting you physically, your body, and also some intellectual issues. So nobody's really going to argue that smoking should not be abolished, should be allowed to remain around. We should be allowed to destroy ourselves. We should. Okay, I'm just throwing that out there. Okay. You also need to analyze your audience. So consider who and what your audience knows. I'm your audience. That's the person you're writing for. It's me. But I will be honest. I'm sure you know that I have opinions. But when it comes to grading, I don't grade your belief. I grade how you write about your belief. That's what I grade. I mean, somebody wrote an essay that I disagreed with, what they were saying. But that's not what I graded. I graded how well they wrote the narrative about what it was. I'm old enough that I can get past that. I don't let it influence my grade. And half the time, I don't even know whose paper I'm grading, because I have to grade so many. I just roll through them, and I go, okay. Except I do have to admit, though, when I was grading the papers from the kids from Crosbyton, I just was there Friday, and I was grading their papers. Those were some of the last papers I graded. So I could see their faces as I was grading their papers, but I don't normally, that doesn't cross my mind. You guys, I have a better chance of knowing who you are when I grade. I know what you look like better, okay? So, but remember, the audience is open to listening to your ideas and willing to listen to your points. Gathering and documenting evidence, that's one of the things we're going to start learning on Wednesday, is how to go out there and get the evidence. All points in your essay must be supported. So there's different kinds of evidence. There are facts, and facts are statements that people generally agree are true and can be verified independently. If I were to say that the United States, the Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4, 1776, everybody's pretty much going to agree with me that that's right. I don't need to quote a source on it. But if you have a statistic or something, you have to give me the source. And I will say that on the narratives, some of the people gave me sources, okay? And you have to include it in the sentence. Opinions are judgments or beliefs that are not substantiated with proof. As a result, they do not carry the same weight as a fact. But they can be persuasive, particularly when from an expert in a relevant field. And that has to deal with credibility. That's the believability of the person offering the opinion. So I'm going to talk about, one of the topics is, has children's behavior become worse over the years? Rodney's going, yeah. And there are a lot of, when I was teaching, I would have, normally up until the last 2 years, I've had at least 2 sections of only SPC students. I didn't just have ITV. And a lot of the girls in there were taking human growth and development, human lifespan and growth and development, whatever that is. And so they wanted to write about this topic. And I had one young woman who was writing about it. She goes, oh, I found a wonderful source. It's a blog, though, but it had such good information in it. Can I use it? And I said, well, let's go look at your source. So we're in there looking on the computer, and it's a blog. And I said, what's the author's name? And she shows me. I said, what are her credentials? She's a mother of 3. Now, she could be very, very smart. But a mother of 3, if she's talking about how to raise kids and she's judging by her 3 kids, that's a very limited sample. So if I use her as a source, it's not that valid, honestly. But if I were to say, introduce a source, and it's John Smith, and he is the chair of the Department of Adolescent Psychology at MIT, now I've got somebody who's an authority about children, about the behavior of adolescents, who has done research, who has background information that supports what his opinions are going to be more believable than her opinions. And that's why you can't use blogs. You can't just use a website. And God love it, you can't use Wikipedia. And you know why? Anybody can go in and submit information to Wikipedia to be put in there. And the Wikipedia doesn't check the validity of the information. That's not their goal. Their goal is just to get lots of information on there. It's kind of like the People's Encyclopedia, I guess. So credibility is important. So that's why blogs are not acceptable, websites are not acceptable. Though I will make, like if you're doing the death penalty, there's a couple of huge, massive death penalty websites where you can get statistics on how many people are set up for executions in the states and all that stuff. But also, your information needs to be relevant. So if you're talking about, and that's the very first one, if you're talking about the death penalty and you talk about the death penalty in Sri Lanka, that's not really relevant to the death penalty in the United States, okay? But it should support your thesis and be pertinent to your argument. It should be representative. You've got to look at all sides, remember. And it should be sufficient. You've got to have evidence to support your points. Documentation is also one of those things we're going to talk about. I'm not going to really go into it right now, but basically that's letting the reader know who it comes from, which means you have to quote correctly within your document. You also have to have a works cited. And then we have plagiarism, representing the ideas of, and notice it says presenting the ideas or words of others as your own. The reason I'm saying that is I had somebody plagiarize their narrative. Yeah, you look, that's this semester. 61%. This narrative right now, that I just finished grading, 61% of that narrative came from a source online that was caught by Turnitin. And I found it was not, I didn't even look at it. I was grading and going, sounds interesting. So I just typed in the first sentence and boom, found the website like that. Went back to the Turnitin thing and said, there it was. Why am I doing all this extra work? That was going through my mind. So you can't take somebody else's ideas and claim them as your own. That's copyright infringement is what that is, and it's plagiarism. Now, I don't fail somebody for the course. I will allow people to stay in the course, but don't do it often. Common knowledge is, there are a lot of things out there that we know. So if I were going to try to use the First or Second Amendment, First Amendment is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. I'm not going to, you don't have to quote the Bill of Rights. You don't have to have it as a source on a works cited. I'm going to go with the notion that that's okay, right? We know that. I mean, I know that. You may not, but okay. But there are certain pieces of information, like George Washington was the first president. You don't have to give a source for that. So that's common knowledge. But if you're going to tell me that Michael Jordan scored 20,000 points during his career, I don't know that information, so you have to give a source for it. Somebody wrote their compare and contrast on Jordan and Kobe, I think. Okay, so document any use of a direct quotation in ideas, statistics, charts, diagrams, or pictures that you obtain from your source. We don't need pictures in this essay, okay? That's not needed. Dealing with the opposition. It's called refutation. I don't know if anybody does CX debate, cross-ex debate, but the whole point of cross-ex debate is that you have to deal with the opponent's argument. If you're on, whether you're pro or con, if you're on the cons, you have to negate their argument. So I'm asking you to do that in this one. But you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it like you do in debate. And I thought I'd throw these two things in here for you because we're a little confused sometimes about what's deductive and inductive. Deductive reasoning proceeds from a general premise or assumption to a specific conclusion. This is what most people think when we're talking about logic. And to be honest, how many of you took any kind of science in high school and you sat in a lab like chemistry and you did a scientific experiment, but all you were doing was proving what has already been proven? That's what we do. That's not really, you're not really doing an experiment. You're learning how to write a a scientific experiment. That's what you're learning. You're not really learning to do anything really that great. Whereas inductive reasoning moves from evidence to conclusion, and that's what Sherlock Holmes does. When you read his stories or watch his movies, he looks at the evidence and then comes up with a conclusion. And that's argumentation, not the art of persuasion. So I've got a wonderful little PowerPoint that I found online about how to write an effective summary. So we're going to begin in that because that's what's going to happen. In the past, I have done summary as a separate exercise on its own, and I would find articles for students to summarize. This is probably the writing assignment that's going to do the most good out of everything I'm teaching you. Because a lot of times when you get in upper level courses, your instructors will give you, they'll have an assignment where you have to read an article, you have to read a book, and then you have to summarize it. And so that's what I'm going to teach you. But the good news is your next writing assignment, since compare and contrast was due last night, and I apologize for having two places to turn it in. I thought I got rid of them, but I hadn't, so I'm going to have to work between the two. But where was I going with that? I got sidetracked. Anyway, summary, I thought it was pointless to have you summarize an article, read something that's not going to benefit you, whereas if I have you summarize an article about your topic, then it's at least going to be useful for the big document. That's why I decided to incorporate it this way, okay? So what we're going to do is you're going to do a summary and paraphrase exercise. You're going to find an article about the topic that you're going to write your essay on, and you're going to summarize it, and then you're going to pull out one sentence of a certain length in it, I believe, and paraphrase it for me so that you learn how to do both skills. So we're going to spend time learning that. All right, so here's the PowerPoint. You don't have a copy of this because, dadgummit, you don't need it. But it is in the summary folder in week 7, okay? So writing an effective summary, and you're going to notice that it's English 13 and 1. That's pretty much a standardized designation for freshman composition 1 across the board at universities, colleges. So a summary is a significant reduction of the original source. So what I'm hoping is that you'll find an article between 750, 1,000, 1,250 words that you summarize for this assignment. It's only going to be 1 page long, but it's of equal value as the argumentation essay. So to write an effective summary, you've got to follow these guidelines. You determine the main idea of the piece you have read or viewed. That's pretty much something you've had to do in English classes since you were first learned to read. What's the main idea? Then you're going to write one sentence that captures the main idea. You're going to read, note the other major areas or of evidence that the author presents for you. And then you're going to write one sentence that basically is the gist of each of those major areas. And that's effectively a summary. So avoid common problems. I love the lip ring, okay? To avoid plagiarizing, do not look at the source while you're composing the summary. This goes with the notion that you're going to read it at least more than one time. And I'm going to be honest, I realize that that's probably not going to happen. You're going to read it once and try to summarize it by just glancing back. I get that. I know. But to do a good summary, you need to read it more than once. So use what you remember from the reading or viewing. Do not use first or second person pronouns. A summary, more so than anything else, you are not part of the summary. You are summarizing someone else's ideas. So obviously there's no I, me, my, there's no you or your in it. It's strictly a summary so that I, as the reader, can decide if I want to go read that article, that it has pertinent information for whatever I'm looking at. And this is how it ends up being an assignment in a lot of classes. You go to tech, and a lot of times, even in upper level classes, your instructor might be somebody working on their doctorate, and so they have research in their fields, and so they'll have you look up topics and find articles, and then you do a summary of it, and then they can go, well, do I need to look? Is this a good article for me? The whole point, though, of the summary is allowing the reader to decide whether they want to go read that article. So there's no personal bias in it. It is strictly a summary of what's going on. Let's see. Write the summary in your own words. Wow, I'm scrolling through this fast. After you've written the summary, you can revisit the source to confirm the facts. Do not express an opinion about the source, neither disagree nor sing its praises or shout its praises. Okay. So use this formula. You use the specific name of the piece plus a strong action verb plus the main idea. The 60-minute story, Thrift Shop Masterpiece, explains the controversy surrounding a possible Jackson Pollock painting. That would be the first sentence of a summary. It gives you the title of the story, and a lot of times when you have a 60-minute story, there's not really an author of it. Somebody else has written it, somebody else performs it. Does that make sense? It reads it. And so it tells you what those are. The name of the piece. Technically, you're supposed to give the author's name and the author and the title of the article. So that sounds better. Let's see. Show me what you can do. In fact, that's the end of that. Now you have a document that begins off with writing a good summary, or it's got a big heading on it that says writing a summary. Looks like this. Good summaries, that's what it says. Good summary. Okay. Good summaries tell the main idea. They're written in your own style. They're shorter than the original document. So if I'm asking for one page might have 300, 400 words on it. Okay? They explain all the important notions or arguments, and they condense a lot of information. When you write a summary, there's no quotes, there's no statistics. You're just summarizing the main ideas. No quotes. Okay? So you got to find the main idea. So one of the things they recommend in here is plan to read an article several times. I realize that's probably not realistic. You want to get the general notion, write that down after you finish it. But one of the things that talks about later on in this particular document is print a copy of the document. Print a couple of copies of the source, of the article you're gonna summarize. And for you guys here at SBC, all you have to do is walk down this hallway after class if you have time, since we end at an odd time. You should. Go down here, you can go onto the computer in the computer lab that's very end. You can print, so they can see me pointing. You can print up to 60 pages a week. So you can print a couple of copies of your article, and that way you can actually have it sitting in front of you in hard copy. It's hard to annotate an article that's online unless you are pretty efficient at doing things like that. It's a lot easier for you to sit there and you can highlight, you can make notes on the outside of it, and so you've got this kind of physical copy to work with. I think that would benefit most all of you. And I know schools are really rigid about printing, but dadgummit, sometimes you just need a hard copy. It's easier to work with. So, to figure out the central idea, you should ask yourself, okay, let's make this bigger, sorry. You ask yourself, look at the title. What does the title say? The place it was published, because, or the publisher, and the reason I'm saying that is the publisher is important. If something is in People magazine, it's aimed at a very wide population of probably, I want to say, early 30s and up. But if I'm looking at U.S. News and World Report, it's something else. And if I look at Scientific American, there's a whole different population reading all three of those, right? So whatever it's published in is important. If I'm going to look up the death penalty, and for some reason the Christian Science Monitor writes a lot of articles about the death penalty, that's going to be a probably biased source against it, okay? So you look at the data publication. When you're talking about topical issues, the more recent the article, probably the better it is. If we're writing about English land stuff, it doesn't matter. The date's not important, okay? You can figure out the type of essay, the tone of the piece. Do you guys deal with tone at all in high school? Did they ever talk about the word choice that the author uses? Because like if I'm going to sit there and I'm going to write about the smell in a room, if I want to talk about the odor that permeated the room, negative connotation. If I talk about the smell in the classroom was of coffee, that's not so bad. And then if I talk about the perfume of the coffee permeated. So those all have positive or negative connotations. So when you write, the words you choose can set up a tone in the reader for how they relate to it. So if you want somebody to think that the death penalty needs to be there because people have done horrible things and they need to die for it, then you're going to use words that talk about disgusting or horrific. You're going to use words that will color whatever information you're giving us, shows that that is a bad thing. And so authors do that when they write. And that's how you perceive bias in an essay. And then notions which seem to be repeated throughout. So here's an example. In Bypass Cure, James Johnson argues that new research suggests that the best cure for diabetes is the surgical solution of a gastric bypass. That is so wrong. That statement is so wrong. My husband's diabetic, and gastric bypass is not going to get rid of his diabetes. I can tell you that right now. But it tells you, there's the title of the article, there's the author. It's all in there. So identify important arguments. Now you want to do a second reading, or you can just skim it a second time. If there's headings in your article, sections like when you read a textbook, there's all those sections and the bullet points. Those are the important things to know. If they pulled it out, it's important, right? So here it says, read on a paper copy or use a computer program that allows you to annotate. The problem with that is if you forget to, you can't really make notes on the side. It's a little bit harder to mark up an article like that. And if you don't have a PDF, or if you're not lucky like me and I can draw on PDFs. And if I printed out, those marks would be there. Underline the topic sentence of each paragraph. The first sentence should be the topic sentence. Should be the main idea of what's going on in the paragraph, particularly because you're going to be reading nonfiction stuff. Okay? But if no sentence gives the main idea, then you just figure out what the main point is and put it in the side. Write that sentence in your own words. When you finish the article, read all the topic sentences you marked or wrote down. In your own words, rewrite those main ideas and use complete sentences. And don't use the same words, phrasing, or sentence structure as the original, because it will show up as plagiarized. Everything you're turning in for me is going through Turn It In, and it will show as plagiarized if you do that. And you need to leave out unimportant details. Okay? And it should be as short and concise as possible. I'm really emphasizing that with one of my students, SPC students I have on Monday, Wednesday. he thinks, why use 5 words when I can use 25 to get the point across? And you're like, no, 5 is much better, please. So writing your summary, it should start with the author's name and the title of the work. There are several different ways to do this. So all of these are introducing the introductory part of your first sentence of a summary. In Cats Don't Dance, John Wood in Cats Don't Dance explains, according to John Wood in Cats Don't Dance, as John Wood vividly elucidates in his ironic story Cats Don't Dance, and John Wood claims in his ironic story Cats Don't Dance, and so it sounds like an interesting article. I want to read it. Look for the thesis sentence or write out a thesis sentence that summarizes the main idea. And it goes on to say, underline a topic sentence for each paragraph or write a sentence in the margins or on a notebook paper for each paragraph. Combine the thesis with the title and the author in your first sentence of the summary. So here's a first sentence. In Cats Don't Dance, John Wood explains that in spite of the fact that cats are not really popular pets who seem to like us, felines are not really good at any activities that require cooperation with someone else, whether that is dancing or sharing. For the past 2 nights, my kitten, which is now about 7 weeks old, has decided to sleep under the covers with me. And in the middle of the night when somebody's chewing on your thigh, that's a little bit, that wakes you up, definitely, okay? The rest of your summary should tell some of the central concepts that are used to support the thesis. Be sure to restate them in your own words. Make it as short and concise as possible. It's been in there like 4 times now, short and concise. And stick to the important points. And now it talks about using author tags. An author tag, technically, I'm going to tell you, in a summary, every sentence should refer to the author. It should begin with the author, okay? So you've seen the first one. Here the one they have here is, the first one is, according to Mary Johnson in her essay, Cats Make Good Pets, the feline domestic companion is far superior to the canine one. My second sentence will go, she also discusses blah, 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 blah. The author continues on with, that's my third sentence, the author continues on. Johnson later discusses this. Mary Johnson concludes her article with blah, blah, blah. Every sentence should start with a reference back to the author. What that does is it allows you to stay focused on what the author said and not what you want to say, okay? So you also need to continue to make it clear, that's what this says, to the reader when you are still talking about the idea in that author's work. To do this, use author tags. You can use, the first time you refer to them, use first and last name. Never use the first name only. Calling somebody by their first name is informal. This is a formal academic document. So you use full name, last name, correct gender pronoun, the author, and if you've got multiple authors, it becomes a little more difficult, to be honest, because you're either going to say, you might have to go Johnson et al. It's just Latin for a bunch of others, okay? Or the authors. You can also, if you don't have an author, then you have to refer to the title or you have to call it the article. It gets interesting. So the other thing they give you right here, there's some wonderful verbs to use in those sentences. So you don't always write, the author writes, the author said, the author does this. You can say the author argues. She also reminds us. She intimates. She concludes. There's a good one to show that you're at the end, the final idea that they give you. The author defines. Johnson highlights. Smith concedes. The author discusses how researchers analyze. So you've got lots of good verbs there to use. I kind of like that part. So when you refer to the author after the first time, you always use the last name. I'm saying you can vary it, but don't use first and last name every single time you refer to the author. You have to have variety because it gets boring. But because it's a summary and it should be no more than a page long, somebody's going to, I guarantee I'll probably have 5 or 6 kids who'll do page and a half, 2 pages summaries. And I'm like, I just want one. I don't want to have to spend hours grading, okay? But so you can see what they do here at the bottom of this point. First point, they give you Johnson comments according to Wood's perspective. This Jones implies. Toller criticizes. In conclusion, use different verbs and adverbs. That breaks up the monotony, okay? And you don't need to use an author's title, but it does help to add their credentials to show that they're an authoritative source. So look at this example. In Global Warming Isn't Real, Stephen Collins, a professor at the University of Michigan, claims that. That's a good thing. If you need words on a word count, when you're doing something for another class, if you need words, even in your research essay, sometimes you just want to summarize an article. You can do that. In Global Warming Isn't Real, Stephen Collins, a professor at the University of Michigan. How much better if I say he's talking about global warming, if I say Stephen Collins, a professor in the environmental studies department at the University of Michigan. Now I've made him authority, haven't I? You can't make up that information, though. You have to have it, okay? New York Times critic Johann Bachmann argues in Global Warming is the next best thing for the Earth. That one's fine. The only problem is a New York Times critic doesn't necessarily mean he knows anything about global warming. He could be just a critic of books, okay? And you always need to make it clear when you're discussing the ideas of the author. Here are some ways to do that. Use author tags. Use mentions of the article. That's the other way. You can also go, the article goes on. You don't have to say the author every time, as long as you refer to the article. And it says, add the page number, cross this off. I don't want page numbers because I don't want you quoting any kind of information in your summaries, okay? And then they give you a template that has some more stuff. What I want to do right now, though, is I want to start looking at possible topics for you to do for argumentation, because when she comes in to talk to you Wednesday or Thursday about doing research, she's going to say, what are some topics? And I'm just going to have to throw them out because people haven't had enough time. So we can go on, we can revisit the summary later on. All right, let me go in. I got to make this a lot smaller. And go down to the topic list, which is the next to the last thing in the argumentative folder. And the topics they're just wonderful. And they're given as questions. That doesn't mean you should use a question as your title. Think about it. If you use a question as your title, the whole point of argumentation is to take a stand. So here's the first one, and it's interesting. Is global climate change man-made, if I can get the words out? You know, then there's a wonderful database called Opposing Viewpoints. If anybody does extemporaneous speaking, argumentative, or persuasive, it's a great place to get information about topics. And it's a database in Gale Group, which we have access to. Is the death penalty effective? Slightly different from should it be abolished. Is our election process fair? Most of you did not vote in the election last year, would be my guess. Rodney, did you vote? I did too. Awesome, you're old enough too. Okay, that's great. I missed the ability to vote in the presidential election my senior year because my birthday was at the end of November versus the beginning of November. So I missed out on it. But let's be honest, why do we have an electoral college and we have a popular vote? That's confusing to me. Why do we have both? So is it fair? Because somebody can win the popular vote but lose the electoral college depending on the population of where the votes come from, or the mix, you know what I'm saying? And they just redid all the stuff in Texas after the census. And so once again, the South Plains and West Texas, we've got less representatives than Dallas and Fort Worth and San Antonio and Houston have, because we don't have the same population. Do colleges put too much stock in standardized test scores? Did y'all take the SAT, ACT? Lots of fun. But the problem with those tests are aimed at upper middle class white people. So it's not fair to the rest of the population. So, is torture ever acceptable? Only when teaching English. It's acceptable. Do you feel tortured sometimes in here? I do too. Somebody's got to teach it, okay? Should men get paternity leave from work? That's been a very popular topic, I'll be honest. I actually have one student whose baby's due in December. And he's like, yes. I said, no, that doesn't mean you can't go. You get out of school. You still have to attend school. Paternity leave is for work. Is the lottery a good idea? We put the lottery in the state of Texas, I don't know, 30 years ago. And I don't know if TEA has seen a cent of that lottery money. It would be interesting to check and find out if they've ever given any money to education in the state of Texas. Do we have a fair taxation system? I don't think so. And part of the reason is the more money you have, the more likely you can afford a really good tax accountant or tax lawyer, and you don't have to pay taxes. Our previous president has not paid taxes in I don't know how many years. That's why he doesn't want to release his tax returns. And there's no I'm sure, do you really think Bill Gates pays that many taxes? He's a billionaire, multi-billionaire, but yeah, you know, because they've got good lawyers. I can't afford anybody. My son does my taxes, okay? He's a computer science guy, you know, but he does my taxes for me. Do curfews keep teens out of trouble? Does anybody live where there's a curfew? Are there curfews anywhere? Do curfews keep teens out of trouble? People will try to write this, but I'm going to be honest. Whatever you can do after a curfew, you can do before a curfew, right? I'm just saying. having taught in high school, I mean, having been a high school kid a long time ago, whatever you want to do wrong, you can do before curfew. So, is cheating out of control? Now, this is not about cheating in a relationship. This is about cheating on your taxes, cheating in class. Oh, why are you frowning now? Yeah, well, to be honest, why do you think I allow open notes on stuff? Because I know people are going to talk. Somebody's going to take the test and somebody else takes it, and you're like, well, I got this, but I get that. I understand. But that's another reason why, because I allow open notes, that's another reason why I don't let you retest to get a better grade. Dadgummit, if you can't figure out how to make a good grade the first time, when it's open notes, and you can look at the book, I don't know, okay. Are we too dependent on computers? Lord, yes. This class would not happen without computers. Are parents clueless about child predators on the internet? I think that's not a great topic. I think it should be, are parents clueless about how to, the word would be to monitor their children's use of the internet would be a better topic to me. I mean, my 9-year-old grandson decided he can make TikTok videos, and he can cuss in them, and that makes my daughter unhappy. So his phone gets taken up quite a bit, let's just say. Should animals be used for research? Should we put stuff on little bunnies that burns their skin so that we'll know not to use that in our makeup? Yeah. Should cigarette smoking be banned? See? Yes, it should. No. If you want to smoke, that's fine. But, who's going to argue that cigarette smoking is good? Again, so that comes from that. Are cell phones dangerous? Come over here and let me whack you with my cell phone, right? Yeah. Are they dangerous? If you're not using it, no, they're not dangerous. It's when you're using it that they become dangerous. Okay? Are law enforcement cameras an invasion of privacy? They tried to pass that in Lubbock, and it did not pass as a city ordinance. And that was probably, when you live as long as I have, that could have been 20 years ago, but I think it was like in the range of 10. Are test scores a good indication of a school's competency? As an educator, I think we don't need to just evaluate a school's competency. Students should be held accountable, and their parents should be held accountable. It shouldn't just be the school's responsibility to teach students. If you've got a family that doesn't teach the value of education, if they don't help the kids, that's what parents should do. So, but that's an educator, having had a parent go, well, it was embarrassing for my child to have to come in at lunch and make up a test he didn't take, or he failed. That's, you have to allow him the opportunity to retake a test and pass. And so he couldn't come home for lunch. You would rather have him fail my class because he couldn't come home for lunch. Okay. So, see, I'm not super sympathetic sometimes about stuff. Do we have a throwaway society? Yeah, we do. We just throw junk away all the time. Or drive down an alley. Don't drive down an alley, but walk into an alley and see all the stuff that's just sitting out there. I had a lounge chair of my husband sitting out in the alley for like 4 months, and finally my neighbor hauled it off. So right after he had a stroke, I was getting rid of stuff all I could. It was a gross chair, Is child behavior, here it is child behavior better or worse than it was years ago? Yuck. Should companies market to children? Hey, it's October. They've already had all those Christmas things being advertised, and where are they all now? You can't get them. They're sitting out in those boats in the ports where they can't get off of those ships, right? Should the government have a say in our diets? Hey, guys, at those high schools, guess who tells you what you can and can't eat at school? It's so nice when you go to college because you can drink whatever you want, right? You aren't stuck with drinking milk in a plastic pouch. Anybody else have that? That's just a recipe for a mess, At least we had the little cartons, and they had chocolate milk too, right? Should the government have a say in our diets? There it is. Does access to condoms prevent teen pregnancy? There's an honest reply. No, access doesn't prevent anything. Use does. That's the big, let's be honest, right? Again, having taught in high school, and at SPC, I have had pregnant students in class and give birth during the semester and show up for class the next day. Whereas when I taught in high school, if it was somebody's birthday, hell no, they weren't coming to school. It's their birthday. You're supposed to get your birthday off. particularly if you're getting your driver's license that day, right? You know, you see? Well, I've never gotten my birthday off unless it lands on Thanksgiving, so it occasionally will be on Thanksgiving. All right, so does access to condoms lead to irresponsible, dangerous, or bad behavior? It's just like the curfew, in my mind. Whatever you can do with access to condoms, you can do without access to condoms, right? So, okay. Are actors and professional athletes paid too much? God love it, I think Pat Mahomes is awesome, but I think he's paid way too much. And I think the rest of his team is not being paid enough because they're certainly not playing like it, are they? Okay. Are CEOs paid too much? Chief executive officers of, major corporations. They're making millions. We're not talking like a million, we're making like multiple millions. Whereas we won't talk about what professors at community colleges get paid. You don't get an education to be rich unless you want to go into administration. The money's in administration, not in teaching. Do violent video games cause behavior problems? This has been around since the 90s. Should creationism be taught in public schools? That's an interesting one, I'm going to be honest. Which is basically, creationism is the Christianity theory of how the world was created. I like this one. Are beauty pageants exploitive? And why don't we have male beauty pageants? Why don't they have to parade around with little banners across and wear little Speedos and swimsuits, right? Why don't they have to dance and sing? Oh wait, that's like American Idol or something, isn't it? Why do we do that to women? Should English be the official language in the United States? Well, it's a lot easier to teach if English is the official language, I'll tell you that. I know somebody's going to write about this. I got the paper about the guy that had the car that had all the technical terms in it. His compare and contrast paper, I was looking at the draft, and I was like, okay, it's not quite as technical as it was with this, every dimension on the engines and stuff like that. So we'll see. Should the racing industry be forced to use biofuels? I've gotten good papers on that. When should parents let teens make their own decisions? I think the problem is we have parents who are letting teens make their own decisions before they're ready to. All right, should the military be allowed to recruit at high schools? They already do. Aren't you required to go back and do when you first joined? Didn't you have to go back to your school in your uniform and try to pep talk the guys into signing? Yeah.
I was a recruiter in Dallas.
In Dallas? Cool. Okay. That's not too bad. Again, except you have to.
Yeah, I was in college.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, I didn't go to high school.
Yeah. Should the alcohol drinking age be increased or decreased? Well, okay. This is going to be one of those where everybody who wants it decreased is not the age to drink. And I get that. The other one that's probably will not show up is going to be, should recreational marijuana be legalized in Texas? Okay. The only people that want to write about that one are the ones who want to smoke it or eat it, right? And if you want to write about it, that's fine. When I was teaching in high school, I've been teaching argumentation for a long time. I did not allow the high school kids to write on it because, it kind of went against school policy. In college, if you want to write about it, that's fine. But I will sit there and think, okay, I know what you're doing in your spare time. I had a student on the narrative. I'll just bring this up real quickly. I had a student on the narrative who said, I don't have any stories to write about. I said, what's your favorite thing to do? And he looked at me and said, smoke marijuana. I said, did you ever get caught by the police? He goes, yeah. I said, write that story. So, by the way, that student did not finish the semester at all. So, I guess he was busy taking care of business in another area. Does age matter in relationships? I've had girls try to write this, and it's hard. There's not enough research out there. It's hard to find it. Okay. What age is appropriate for dating? If you're the father of a young girl who's 13, 35, right? Okay. Should gay couples be able to marry? That is not an option. Cross off this number 37 because it is legal. And I don't want to, and that's one of those forbidden topics is homosexuality because the only people who want to write about that are the people who are avidly against it. I'm sorry. I don't care.